tell me again when you got here and where you came from?
Okay, I arrived in January 1964 from Boston. I had been married 2 weeks and took the boat over here and arrived in the middle of January.
And your husband is from here, but how long had he been in studying at MIT?
He was there for several years, 3 or 4 years with different subjects. So when he finished his degree, well, we got married and came here. So that was the beginning.
How did you meet?
Actually, we met through a church group. We met through a church group where we were doing volunteer work for the Puerto Rican immigrants in Boston. And since he was Spanish speaking, he went to volunteer to see what kind of work he could do. And through some friends of mine, I ended up helping out there too, and that's how we met. So we knew each other for 3 years before we got married.
When you got here, did you have a place rented already, or did you have to go search for an apartment?
No, when we arrived, we stayed with my in-laws for a couple of weeks, and immediately I went out the next day looking for an apartment. And we found a furnished apartment, and I think we were in there by the end of January, so we found a place very quickly.
Whereabouts was the first place?
It was, the corner of Londres and Infanta Carlota, which is now called something else. I can't remember what it's called now. We still call it Infanta Carlota. Yeah.
Street names has changed a great deal.
Yeah. And a year later, we found a place that was brand new, and it was in the building next door. Unfurnished place, brand new, and so we were there until we were on the 7th floor. Lovely view from the back. We could see the Mediterranean and Montjuic and all that. But several years ago, we bought this place and moved here because my husband has a problem. He had polio when he was a child, and he has one leg that doesn't work too well. So he wanted to be on a first floor apartment in case the electricity goes off, which from time to time happens, as you know. And so that's why we bought this place and moved in here. So that's the story.
And when you got here, I assume it was a lot more of a foreign country when you got here than it is now, for instance.
Oh, yeah. It was much more backward than it is now. People used to come to, we came over here, we brought an American refrigerator, 2-door American refrigerator, and people used to come to look at it because refrigerators were pretty new then, and they were very small. And, there were no washing machines really that worked. And you had to go from the beef store to the pork store to the chicken store. You knew that, I suppose, if you were around at that time. So everything was a little bit more complicated.
Where did you wash clothes? Where did most people wash clothes?
In the beginning, I had a washerwoman who went to my mother-in-law's house, and she came and she scrubbed like this, yeah. And then finally, a friend of mine who was married to an Air Force man in France sent me an American washing machine. So that was a great boon.
How did people keep things cool with ice? Were they using ice? Did they deliver ice in those days?
Well, I guess they did. I mean, since I had the refrigerator, I didn't have the problem. But yeah, they still delivered ice. And people shopped every day, except for Sunday when everything was closed. And, you kept things as best you could. So.
Did you have a television when you first moved over here?
We brought a television, but we gave it to my mother and father-in-law because there was almost nothing on television anyway. So that was not a problem. There wasn't much to see.
Just one channel, I guess, really.
Just one channel, yeah. And it took several years before they got many programs. It was only on for, few, I don't know how many hours a day, but not all day, certainly. Yeah.
And did you become aware early on of the Catalan question, as it were? Did people speak Catalan in your husband's household, for instance?
Yeah. My mother and father-in-law spoke Catalan with my husband and his brother, and they spoke Spanish to me, and everything was fine. Except for a long time, they didn't realize how much I understood of Catalan, so that was an advantage. I got to learn some things. Yeah, but yeah, they definitely are Catalan speaking, but actually my father-in-law was from Mallorca, so he had the Mallorquin accent a bit. But they were not Catalanistas, you know, they were not demanding that I learn Catalan or anything. I had to learn Spanish. So I'd studied some Spanish in school, but you know how it is in the States. You don't learn to speak, or here, you learn to translate a few sentences, and that's about it. So anyway, that was the Catalan thing. But of course, my children all speak Catalan.
How long were you here before you had your first child?
9 months. Not quite 9 months yet.
It must have been difficult, I would think, both linguistically and because in a way culturally, to maybe relate to your doctor, or did it?
Well, the vocabulary is pretty limited. And of course, you know, the husband always went with you. Actually, my brother-in-law was a gynecologist, but he didn't deliver my first couple of children. But, you know, my husband went with me if there was a problem. You know, he translated. And no, actually, having the child was very nice here compared to my friends in Boston, because it was very individual. You were treated very well. People sat around with you and chatted while you were in labor, that kind of thing. At least that was my experience. And yeah, so that was fine. Yeah, no problem there.
In general, I mean, were you pretty surprised by the place when you came to live here? Obviously, it would have taken a good deal of adjusting to, no?
Yeah, I had been here as a tourist before I met Jose, and I thought it was a lovely city. In fact, you know, trip around Europe, and I thought, that's really the nicest place I've seen. You know, it really, well, all those beautiful avenues and the sea and you know, that kind of thing. The fountains of Montjuic. But of course, then when I arrived here and realized that sometimes the water pressure wasn't good enough to get water on the 7th floor, and you had to go down with a bucket. But then as soon as we had a child, we got a maid, and that was how we solved the problems. You know, you really did need a maid at that time, you know, to live any kind of normal life.
Were you at all aware of the political atmosphere here at that time, or was there a political atmosphere?
Well, you know, we knew that Franco was around and things were easing up, and everyone was just waiting until he died. And you know, we didn't mess with politics at all. But a friend of ours, actually a friend of my husband's who worked with him, my husband at the time, who was teaching at Esade. And he was a Jesuit priest who went off to live with some of the blue-collar workers and started teaching them about their rights and, you know, a little bit of Marxism. And then they arrested him. And then they put him under house arrest. They didn't throw him in prison, but he was under house arrest. So that was the closest tie we had with the political situation. But you know, heard about other people, but you know, since we weren't involved in politics, that was the personal experience we had.
And did you have a sense of it being a more ordered society then than it is now, in a sense? Streets quieter, more ordered, more disciplined at all?
Yeah, well, probably the young people, the big difference is that, you know, the adolescence was not heard of. You know, people were children, and then, well, they were students, and they went with their families for the summer, and then all of a sudden they finished university, and they were grown up, and they found a boyfriend or a girlfriend, and they got married. But this whole business about adolescence, and everyone had to be home at 10 o'clock in the evening, you know, people who lived with their parents, 10 o'clock in the evening, you had to be home. And of course, you know how it is now. I mean,
so it's probably easier to raise children back then than perhaps now.
Yeah, really, it was easier. Yeah, everybody knew the rules, and you know, so that's a big difference. And as far as the city goes, you know, well, you know how it was with the Olympics. I mean, the city became more beautiful because they cleaned up all those buildings. for the Olympics, and now you have these beautiful buildings where you can see all the carving and all that. But on the other hand, the streets were a lot cleaner because people didn't, well, there was not so much stuff to throw on the street and people didn't do it anyway. So, you know.
Stuff was scarce, wasn't it? It's true.
Yeah, well, there wasn't all this stuff that, things, wrappings, you know how it is when you go to buy something, you've got something in a plastic tray and then you've got wrapping around it, and so that's the difference. And actually people do just throw things on the street now. I don't know who they are, but it's pretty bad lately.
How was traffic then?
Oh, traffic, there were very few cars. We had a car, we had a Volkswagen.
Little Beetle?
Yeah, which I got in Andorra because I had a car in Boston, and because I had the papers of my car in Boston, I was allowed to import a car from Andorra. Because you had to wait 1.5 years to buy a car here. They weren't producing enough, you know. The Seat was making these 600s, but they weren't making enough because all of a sudden people wanted to have a car. So I took my little Volkswagen Beetle and I would drive to the Plaza Catalunya and just leave it. They park there on the sidewalk, on the street. So, yeah, very few cars. And of course it was quieter because there weren't that many cars, yeah. So.
I always heard a woman had to have her husband's permission to have a driver's license here.
The driver's license, I don't know. But I know that a woman had to have permission to buy a car. Because a neighbor of mine, her husband, she had separated from her husband, and she still needed to go to him. And she had her own money, you know, she just had to go to him to please sign this so she could buy a car. I don't know about the license, I hadn't heard that one. Could be, but since I had a license, well, then I had to get my Spanish license, but nobody ever asked Jose to sign for that. But I think I didn't do that right away. I had my American license for 3 or 4 years, I think, before I finally got one from here.
Did you note in different ways that, were you surprised by the way that women were treated here? Were women treated really as second-class citizens in those days?
No.
No.
Not my experience at all.
No.
No. In fact, several women that I know were working. You know, one woman had her own pharmacy, and some of the women were teaching. In fact, my mother-in-law, who was a teacher, taught her whole life till she was 70 years old. And she had her children, and she certainly was treated as an equal. So that wasn't my experience at all. No.
Where were you on the day that Franco died? Do you remember where you were?
Sure, I was home. Everybody waiting to hear about it. For me, I think that the transition really began when Carrero Blanco was blown up. That was the first thing, because everybody was just waiting for Franco to die, but this was a big exciting thing. And the thing about it is that within hours of this happening, you know how it happened, right? Yeah. Within hours of it happening, there must have been 50 jokes out around about this. Nobody said, "Isn't that a terrible thing? Isn't that awful?" People were making jokes about it.
Not the car going up.
Yeah. The whole thing. So I think that was sort of the beginning of, oh, now this thing is coming to an end. Yeah. And yeah, I mean, everybody was waiting for, I don't know, at least a week. People knew that he was dying, and they said he's really dead, but you know, they're keeping him on ice, and they're waiting for the right day, and you know, what was really true, I don't know, but of course he was out of it for quite a while. So, but you know, people were excited about it. People drank champagne, and that's over. But then there was a little worry about what might happen next. I think everybody was worried about the generals and how the generals would take over and how they would accept democracy. But well, then the other time that was scary was the day of the attempted coup. That really was scary, because I remember my daughter was out. She was, I don't know, 12 years old or something. She was out at a friend's house, and we called her and said, "Stay there, don't go out on the street, because we don't know what's going to happen." So, well, you know what happened, and you have to thank the king for that, I think. And you know, Jordi Pujol was told to be tranquil, Jordi, Yeah, so, but that was a scary time. I think that was, once that was over, I think people relaxed, and there was a lot of optimism in those days. You know, the first elections were really exciting.
Yeah.
All those posters all over the streets, and the jingles on television. El Cento. Do you remember that? Were you?
No.
No?
No.
Yeah.
I wasn't here for
Oh, you weren't here then?
that election.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
I was here for the attempted coup
Yeah.
in 81. But
Yeah.
I wasn't here in 82 for the
Yeah.
election.
Yeah. It
But
was.
it must have been very sort of enthusiastic.
It was. Everybody was so excited about it. Yeah, really. And well, anyway, then after a while, people got kind of turned off and saying, "Oh, everything's not perfect." What happened?
Were you here when Tararellas came back?
Yeah, of course. Yeah. Well, I didn't go out on the street, but you know, people here were excited about that too. Yeah, I know friends of mine did go out. Friends of, you know, a couple of American friends married to Catalan men. They went out to greet him, and that was exciting too. Yeah, but we didn't go out on the street, but we saw it via television. Yeah.
Good. I would say that that's well. Let me ask you just a couple of other things. When let's say in the late '60s, you had small children. What would your day-to-day life have been like, and how would it have been different from if you had the same situation now?
The same situation now.
Well, if you were here with
Well, you know, I wasn't.
Those days, what did you do? How did you?
I didn't work. You know, I took my children to school. We have 4 children, and they were born in 64, 66, 68, and 70. Okay. So, you know, I took them to school and picked them up after school, and took them to whatever activities they were doing, and the typical kind of thing that they call them soccer moms in the States, you know, but that kind of thing. Well, the difference now, well, since we have 8 grandchildren, 6 of them live around here, and 2 of my children have moved out of the city because it was too expensive to buy a place in the city. So for the same price, they could have a house and a garden.
Yeah.
So, and all the women are working now, you know, and so there's a lot more stress now, I think, than there used to be. I mean, first of all, you know, they're driving father all the time, and right now my son lost his Peruvian girl that was taking care of the children, and they're interviewing people, and they're very nervous. But anyway, you don't have to have this this camera on me all the time. But anyway,
How about on the weekends? What did you used to do on the weekends?
Well, in the year 1971, we built a house in Comaruga at the beach, where I spent all summer there with the children, and my husband would come on weekends and on his vacation. So it's only, well, it used to be an hour and a half away, so the costas they got off, you know, but now the autopista. So, and then we would go there every weekend, all Christmas vacation, all Easter vacation, you know, with the couple of heaters and the fireplace going, and so that's what we did as soon as we had that house, because it was sort of hard on the weekend with 4 little children in an apartment. Yeah. And then a couple of summers, well, 3 summers when the children were small, we went to Boston for the whole summer and rented a place at the beach there, so helped their English a bit. So that was what we did.
Did you grow up bilingual, your children? Trilingual, I guess.
Yeah, trilingual, and they all took French, and they went to a school where they had a lot of French, so they speak French too. One of my daughters, the oldest one, is an interpreter. She also does Italian interpreting, so French, Spanish, Catalan, English, and Italian. Yeah, they all grew up trilingual, if you want. Yeah. So, because they had a lot of.
Lucky.
They were, you know, they were with their grandparents all summer because my in-laws stayed with us all summer long. So they spoke Catalan to the children, they spoke Spanish to me, I spoke English to the children, my husband and I spoke English, he spoke Catalan to his parents. It was a little confusing sometimes. Anyway, so that's my experience.
Great.
I'm sure it's similar to a lot of people that you've talked to.
Well, yes and no.
Mm-hmm.
Yes and no.
Mm-hmm. Have you talked to anyone that was, you know what I think? I think that was a very optimistic time compared to now.
I
Yeah.
think you're right.
Huh?
I think you're right.
I think it was optimistic all over, and, you know, in the States and
No, that's right. I
in
think
Europe.
there's a sense that anything was possible
Yeah,
if people just set their minds
that's
to it.
right, that's right, yeah.
And that the weight of history was negligible, but
Yeah.
this turns out to be a dubious proposition.
Yeah, really. Even the songs we sang, you know, and you know, we belong to this church group, but the hymns that we sang were all very optimistic. There'll be a better world tomorrow.
Yeah, yeah.
So anyway, look what we've got.
Look what we've got. That's it.
Yeah,
But it was an interesting time here.
it was an interesting time here. Yeah, it'll be an interesting time in the States now. I don't know what's going to happen.
Yeah. I hope.
I know you're in Democrats
Hopefully
abroad like me, but whoever gets in there has got a bad situation.
Yeah, that's for sure.